Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Slama, would you like to take a minute to refresh us on LB 399?
I'd love to. Well, thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. LB 399 serves as the first major revision to Nebraska's civic education standards in 70 years. This bill, with the committee amendment, sets a very achievable bar for school districts which can select between one of three options provided for their students to complete by the end of 12th grade. LB 399 also revises some outdated wording. The Americanism Committee, tasked with reviewing each school district's social studies curriculum, will be renamed the Committee on American Civics. The Committee on American Civics will host 2 public meetings per year, with at least one of those meetings open to public comment. This will ensure transparency and accountability in each school district's curriculum choices. According to current statute, teachers who fail to teach civics within the letter of the law can be jailed for a Class 3 misdemeanor. We finally changed that in LB 399 by removing this penalty. After listening to concerns raised in the hearing and in past years, and working with all senators on the Education Committee, LB 399 is a bill with bipartisan support that resulted in it being passed out of the Education Committee on an 8-0 vote. I encourage you to vote green on both the committee amendment and LB 399. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Slama. As the clerk noted, there are committee amendments. There's a committee amendment, AM 286. Senator Groney, as chair of the committee, I do not see on the floor. Senator Walls, would you like to refresh us on the committee amendment at AM 286? Senator Moorfeld, I recognize you to refresh us on the committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, the committee amendment does several different things. First, it makes it so that the citizenship test is not mandatory, but rather one of 3 different options, the 2 others being the ability to participate or go to a public body under the Nebraska statute. The 3rd option being to write a paper or do a project on one of the enumerated national holidays or public figures as stated in the Act. And then it also makes several different changes as well that are substantive.
Thank you, Senator Moorfeld. As the clerk noted, there is a floor amendment, FA 11, from Senator Chambers. Senator Chambers, would you like to take a minute to refresh us on that floor amendment, please?
Yes, Mr. President, members of the legislature, I find a lot of problems with this amendment, which becomes the bill, so I'm going to take it a bit at a time, and this particular amendment is found on page 1 in line 26 of the committee amendment, and this one simply strikes the word patriotic.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Before we adjourned yesterday, Senator Chambers had his opening on FA 11, so we will now begin debate on FA 11. Senator Chambers, you are recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, education is extremely important. Teachers who properly perform the job of educating students should have the highest status and recognition in a civilized society. They are presented with young minds which they can fashion, mold, direct, inspire, encourage, inform, teach, and do all of the things that would be necessary to produce a well-rounded individual of the species Homo sapiens. The Greeks had an ideal. It was a sound mind and a sound body. The teacher deals with the mind. Nobody, to my understanding, has been able to determine what the limitations are of the human mind. Nobody has been able to determine the boundaries of memory. I have asked people questions along that line, and I would always wind up with this one when it comes to infinite ability of the brain to receive. If you were to write a series of digits stretching from the earth to the outermost reaches of the universe, or even up to heaven if there is such a place, would you ever have a series so large that you could not attach one more digit to the end of it? And the answer would obviously be no. There is no point at which a brain, a mind, functioning properly will be so full that it cannot learn or receive one more bit of information or knowledge. Theoretically speaking, the ability of the mind, the brain to learn is infinite, meaning there is no limit whatsoever. This is why I tell young people when I'm talking to them, especially about the tendency for them to do violence to each other. A loaded brain is more powerful than a loaded gun. And even if somebody is approaching you with a loaded gun, because I add, except in a gunfight, and that person has a gun and you don't, and you have the opportunity to speak, you may be able to change that person's mind if you are observant, see what kind of person you're dealing with, and you have the vocabulary to present an argument that will sway that person from the error of his ways. So, when we come here in the legislature and we are dealing with legislation that deals with education, our discussions, our language, our grasp of grammar, our understanding and utilization of syntax ought to indicate what education produces in terms of equipping us to communicate with others. To communicate means that you transmit from your mind information to another person's mind, and you do it by means of words.
1 minute.
The broader, the deeper your vocabulary, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to transmit with precision and exactitude what you have in your mind to that other person's mind. Sometimes you will use more than one word to embrace an idea in order to cover the waterfront. So as we discuss this bill this morning, and we will discuss it for a great long time, I'm going to see if in the discussion tendered by my colleagues manifests what education is supposed to produce. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. You are next in the queue, and you may continue.
Thank you. I am going to do some instructing this morning. The word civics was mentioned. I would like to ask Senator Groney a question if he is on the premises.
Senator Chambers, I do not see Senator Groney.
I would then like to ask Senator Bowles a question.
Senator Bowles, will you yield to a question?
Sure, I'll yield.
Senator Bowles, when the term civics is used in connection with an educational program, just generally speaking, what would the subject of civics include?
I think it would include anything that is related to our civic life together: government, economics, education, all of those issues that mean being part of a community.
Thank you.
Sure.
And that is adequate. I'm going to talk to you all about your Constitution. It's a Constitution of, by, and for white people. It was put together of, by, and for certain white people, for certain or particular other white people. There were classes that existed in America from the beginning. There were the better classes, and there were the rest of you all. The hoi polloi, the riffraff, the masses, the ones who do the hard work, produce wealth so that the better classes don't have to soil their fingers, even though they were known not to wash their hands or practice good sanitation. And the ultimate aim is to give them leisure time, time when they don't have to do anything other than what they choose, even if it's lying around. So they have to make sure that you all stay good and ignorant, that you don't use your brain, you don't develop your mind. You can be paid low wages, you can be made to do dirty work, and they can vice your mind to such an extent that those who do the hardest, heaviest, most dangerous, dirty work receive the least in wages. The least. And when you have people who've been reduced to that semi-human status, you can then exploit them in other ways too. There was a poem, it started, and it didn't rhyme. Bowed by the weight of centuries, he leans upon his hoe and gazes at the ground. The emptiness of ages in his face, and on his back, the burden of the world. Who made him dead to the rapture and despair? A thing that dreams not and that never hopes. Then it goes on to describe this human being who was dehumanized, then concludes something like, O lords, masters, and rulers in all lands, where will you be when this dumb terror rises to judge the world after the silence of centuries? I wish that the discussion on this floor manifested some level of education. I don't say higher education, because you don't need
1 minute
even to know how to read to be in the legislature. Just be a certain age, have lived in a certain area for a certain period of time, be outside of the penitentiary. And you can have been inside the penitentiary if you didn't commit too serious an offense. You're not required to know how to read, not required to know how to write, because this is for people who are white. But in the South, where people of my complexion who were denied the right to have an education had to be able to calculate how many bubbles there are in a bar of soap, glance at a courthouse and be able to tell how many window panes were in the courthouse. Then some ignorant white person would come up who could not read and wouldn't recognize A from bullfrog. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll turn on my light.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Chambers, you're welcome to close on your amendment.
Is this my third time?
It is.
Okay. I mean, I've spoken 3 times already.
You had your opening in 2 times, and this is your third, which is your close.
This is my closing on this motion.
On the amendment, yes.
On this amendment. You've got this ignoramus, tobacco juice running down the side of his mouth, and I'm giving description now that I read in novels by Southern white people who wrote about the lower orders. Tobacco juice running down the side of his mouth, dripping onto his shirt collar, and it doesn't go any further because it being either heavily slimed, it will stay there and not drip any further, or being very loose, like water, it is absorbed by that collar and does not go any further. And they ask him, what is it that you want to do? He said, I want to vote. And here's what they do. They present the ballot to this ignoramus and ask, have you ever voted before? Regardless of what the answer is, yes or no. They'll say, can you read? No, I ain't never learned no learning, and that includes reading. Do you know how to write? Well, I know how to do right, but I don't know how to write. So this white ignoramus is given the ballot, and he can't read what's on it. So the registrar reads the different names or names that represent alleged candidates or alleged names of candidates and asked this fool, which one do you want to vote for? He said, well, one's as good as the other ones to me. Which one do you think I ought to vote for? Well, you see that little square next to all those names? I think you ought to put the X in that square next to the number 2 name on there. And he said, number 2, well, I didn't learn how to count either. And this guy said, do you work? Yeah, I work. Do you get paid money? I get paid money. Well, how do you know they're paying you the right amount? He said, I measures my money. I measures it. And this is what a white guy is writing to show how ignorant his white brothers are. They get around finally to him putting an X in the box that the registrar suggested. Then here comes a refined black woman, has a college degree, is a teacher, and says, I come to vote. And the registrar, who's not much smarter than that idiot, said, you can't vote. Why can I not vote? Because you're black. Black folks don't vote around here. Why not? You're too ignorant to vote. I didn't understand. What's that word? I said you is ignorant. And if you one of them uppity, and he used that bad word, I'll give it to you in 3 sibilos. 3 what? 3 sibilos. You don't know what a sibilo is, and you're supposed to be a teacher? You are not just ignorant, you is ignorant. You is ignorant. Therefore, you can't vote. And that's the way the discussion went, more or less. Then a white woman came behind her, and her name was Susan B. Anthony. All she had going for her was that she was white. The white women couldn't vote in those days because a certain amendment to the Constitution had not been enacted yet, so they had no right to vote. So where did all of this lead? It led to an explanation of why ignorant white men were allowed to vote who could not read. But a black person, no matter how educated, a white woman before the amendment couldn't vote. Well, they were very clever, these racists. They said, if your grandfather voted, then you can vote. And your grandfather had to have lived so many and so many years ago, and that meant all the white people could vote, but no black person could because no black person's grandfather ever voted. And that's where grandfather clauses came in. You let those not qualified to do something do it because supposedly their grandfather did it. And that's what I'm going to talk about, and you all are going to listen to, or you're going to get out. Mr. President, I would ask for a call of the House and a roll call vote.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
24 ayes, 2 nays to go under call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Linehan, please check in. Senator McAllister, please check in. Senator Gregor, please check in. Speaker Scheer, please return to the chamber. All senators are now present. The question before the body is the adoption of FA 11. A roll call vote in regular order has been requested. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Albright? Voting no. Senator Arch? Voting no. Senator Blood? Not voting? Senator Bowles? Voting no. Senator Bostelman? Voting no. Senator Brandt? Voting no. Senator Brewer? Voting no. Senator Breezy? Senator Kavanaugh? Not voting. Senator Chambers? Not voting. Senator Clements? Voting no. Senator Crawford? Not voting. Senator DeBoer? Senator Dorn? Voting no. Senator Erdman? Voting no. Senator Friesen? Voting no. Senator Geist? Voting no. Senator Gregert? Voting no. Senator Groney? Voting no. Senator Halloran? Voting no. Senator Ben Hansen? Voting no. Senator Matt Hansen? Voting no. Senator Hilgers? Voting no. Senator Hilkeman? Voting no. Senator Howard? Not voting. Senator Hughes? Voting no. Senator Hunt? Voting yes. Senator Kolowski? Not voting. Senator Colderman? Voting no. Senator LeGrone? Voting no. Senator Lathrop? Voting no. Senator Lindstrom? Voting no. Senator Linehan? Voting no. Senator Lowe? Voting no. Senator McAllister? Voting no. Senator McDonald? Senator Moorfeld? Not voting. Senator Moser? Voting no. Senator Merman? Voting no. Senator Pansing Brooks? Not voting. Senator Quick? Voting no. Senator Scheer? Voting no. Senator Slama? Voting no. Senator Stinner? Voting no. Senator Vargas? Senator Walls? Not voting. Senator Wayne? Voting no. Senator Williams? Voting no. Senator Wishart? Not voting. Vote is 1A, 34 nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is not adopted. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, the next amendment to the committee amendments offered by Senator Bowles, AM 365.
Senator Bowles, you're recognized to open on AM 365.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment strikes on page 5 of the amendment, lines 24 through 29. This section says that every school board, state board of education, and superintendent shall be held directly responsible for carrying out the section, and not doing so will be considered a dereliction of duty and may be considered a cause for dismissal. I raised this section for many of the same reasons that I raised the section related to teachers and the determination of character yesterday. And I think it's in conflict with the idea of local control and democracy. I don't think that a school board member should be accused of dereliction of duty if he or she has a different opinion than another school board member who happens to serve on the American Civics Committee. I also think that dismissal of a superintendent should be related to his or her performance related to their contract, should be overseen by the school board, and should be outside of a gray area where someone may or may not be making a judgment call about whether he or she fully executed the act or didn't execute the act. Ultimately, I think that one of the concerns I have is that this could become a partisan tool if one school board member disagrees with another school board member's philosophy or point of view. Ultimately, I think that there are many other ways that this underlying legislation, that the intent of the American Civics Act will be implemented, and that people will still be held accountable to the statute as passed. I just don't agree with the idea that a school board member should be accused of dereliction of duty when he or she is carrying out their responsibilities as they were elected to do, or that a superintendent should be subject to dismissal based on a subcommittee of the school board or a definition of an individual's interpretation of dereliction of duty according to this specific statute rather than his or her responsibilities as a whole. I look forward to the debate. I have had a conversation with the Nebraska Association of School Boards. They are in support of this amendment for the reasons that I outlined this morning. I'd appreciate your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bowles. Debate is now open on AM 365. Senator Hunt, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of Senator Bowles' amendment, and I also support the intent of the underlying bill, LB 399, and I agree with the intention of improving the underlying law, that there's a lot that needs to be improved with this. And I applaud Senator Slama's efforts to do that through this bill. There's still a lot of things in this bill that I have a big problem with that make it sort of a non-starter for me, including what I see as the legislation of patriotism. I think that that really veers into a little bit of thought police, a little bit of telling people how they can be patriotic, and then we're kind of left up to the sometimes very partisan, sometimes very ill-intentioned whims of different students. And so when we talk about things like imparting civic knowledge, imparting patriotism, the value of our system, our institution, that might mean different things to different people in different school systems. And so this bill, as it's written, I think it opens too many doors for really unintended consequences that isn't something I can support. And I am open to working on an amendment. I'm doing that a little bit today. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Chambers, you're yielded 3 minutes, 40 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hunt. And this language that Senator Bowles is interested in is interesting. I would like to ask Senator Bowles a question if she would respond.
Senator Bowles, would you yield to a question?
Of course.
Senator Bowles, if I understand your amendment, you would remove all of subsection 7?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. This subsection 7 shows that the ignorant fool that was allowed to vote wrote this language. I wish Senator Groney was here. He's the chairperson of the Education Committee. This bill came out of his committee, and he brought us to where we are. But since he's not here, I'm going to ask a question of one of the people who should have the answer, and that would be the introducer of the bill. I wasn't even thinking about asking her, but she looked at me. And when people look at me, that's a form of communication, and I respond when I'm communicated with. I would like to ask Senator Slama a question or two if she would respond.
Senator Slama, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Slama, do you have a copy of the amendment before you?
Yes.
And the language that Senator Bowles is attempting to remove?
Yes.
Here's the question I want to ask. In line 27, this is the language: neglect thereof by any employee or appointed official shall be considered a dereliction of duty. Then the next line begins with the word may be considered a cause for dismissal. If it shall be the duty, why should there not be a mandate that the person be dismissed for not carrying out that duty?
The intent of adding the language may be considered is part of the language we reformed to give these school districts some flexibility in their enforcement of this.
But it also offers the opportunity for arbitrariness in getting rid of somebody whom they do not like, and they would allow somebody else to keep employment for having done exactly the same thing. Isn't that possible?
I would argue that the language as written without the bill is open to arbitrary interpretation as well.
If you put shall be considered a cause for dismissal, that would make it closer to a
1 minute.
mandate, but I want to analyze a bit more before we get there. Why not say it shall be a cause for dismissal?
Because you could have different levels of failure to follow through on the statute. Failure to teach Flag Day, in my opinion, shouldn't be cause for automatic dismissal. And that's failure to enforce the statute.
You answered the question that I asked in the way you would answer it, but I will pursue it further when I'm recognized. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama, Bowles, Chambers, and Hunt. Senator Slama, you are recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I stand opposed to AM 365. Senator Bowles has raised some fair points, but quite simply, I'm concerned the removal of this section in whole removes the teeth and accountability related to LB 399. As such, I encourage a red vote on this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Chambers, you're next in the queue.
Mr. President, members of the legislature, when people read language, they ought to look at what all is embraced. It says this section. That means every item in this bill that would comprise Section 1. All of those items. Then the ignoramus in the original language that was already here said the school board. Well, how are you going to punish the board? Are you going to say if you have a board of 7 and 4 vote yea and 3 vote nay, and the 4 that vote nay vote against carrying this out, are they the only ones subject to firing, or everybody on the board? And that's not a question for anybody to answer. It's to show how simple-minded this kind of trash legislation is. It's based on emotionalism, based on racism, and ignorant people are motivated by those sentiments. A board comprises people. A board is composed of people. If you're going to punish, you should punish the ones who did whatever is wrong. But there should not be wiggle room where, like in these small towns, and everybody knows how racist, narrow-minded, and parochial small-town people are. I see it on television and in the movies all the time. And these movies are made by white people, and they know each other. These small towns are horrendous places when it comes to gossip, busybodiness, and meddlesomeness. So certain people will be allowed to do things with impunity. Other people will suffer punishment. I started with a presentation about education and how what we do while we're talking about education should exemplify what being educated means. When you're talking about discharging people, you should not have language which in and of itself invites a discriminatory application. If everybody on the school board did nothing, if everybody on the State Board of Education did nothing, nobody need be fired under this. Nobody. But I'd like to ask a question. Is Senator Groney back yet?
Senator Groney, I did not see Senator Groney on the floor, Senator Chambers.
Is Senator Moorfeld here?
Senator Moorfeld, are you here? I did not see Senator Moorfeld on the floor either.
I will ask Senator Pansing Brooks a question.
Senator Pansing Brooks, would you yield to a question?
I guess so.
Senator Pansing Brooks, the way this language is written, it seems to be self-executing, and I'm asking you because Senator Slama is not here.
Where is she?
If you know the track of the morning mist, you know where Senator Slama is. Oh, I would like to ask Senator Slama a question. I didn't realize she's still on the premises.
Senator Slama, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Slama, is this provision, subsection 7, supposed to be self-executing, that as soon as the dereliction is engaged in, dismissal is automatic by operation of law?
No, and we
Okay.
have that wording as may be considered.
Who will dismiss the board members?
1 minute.
Who performs the act of dismissal?
I would have to look into that.
You
don't
didn't
wanna
write
misspeak on the
this. I'm
record.
not blaming you. I'm just calling things to your attention. Who will dismiss the members of the Board of Education? They're elected. Who will dismiss them?
I don't want to misspeak on the record, so I will say that I'll get back to you here shortly on that.
Now, since the superintendent is employed by the school board, would the school board dismiss the superintendent?
That would be yes.
So that's the only one in this list where we can locate an individual who might be dismissed because there's somebody with the dismissing authority. Would you agree or disagree with that?
As of right now, that is the answer that I can give you.
Thank you.
Time, Senator. Senator Chambers, you're next in the queue, and you may continue.
I'm going to teach, as I said, and lecture. You all don't read these bills. Senator Slama, a brand new senator, will be given a piece of trash legislation. I don't expect her to have read it with a microscopic eye or a magnifying glass eye, because people on this floor have not read it. Many of them haven't read it at all. I'd like to ask Senator Wayne a question because he was on, well, let me not say, I'll get it from him.
Senator Wayne, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Wayne, did you serve on the school board at one point?
Yes, I did.
Who is authorized to dismiss a school board?
Nobody, except for the voters at the next election.
Thank you. I would like to ask Senator Hilkeman a question.
Senator Hilkeman, would you yield to a question?
I will.
Senator Hilkeman, who has the power to dismiss the entire State Board of Education?
The voters.
And if the voters don't do that, then who can dismiss them?
Senator, I don't know the answer to that.
There is nobody. Thank you. And members of the legislature, an election is a choice made by the voters. They may choose to retain, they may choose not to. This language was put here by people who didn't have a thought or a brain cell working. They didn't even consider saying they shall be recalled. Put something in that makes it have the appearance of thought. I'd like to ask Senator Moser a question. He's a very thoughtful gentleman.
Senator Moser, would you yield to a question?
If it's something I know the answer to, I'd be glad to answer it for you.
Senator Moser, I think you can answer any question that I ask you, whether you know the answer or not. The answer you can give is, I don't know. That's an answer to the question.
I'd rather give a more an intelligent answer if I could.
Okay, then if you don't know, I'm going to hear what intelligent answer you give me other than I don't know. Who can dismiss a school board?
I am not positive of that answer. I'm not sure that they can be recalled, sir.
You're right. I'm not aware of that. An election is what it would take. Thank you very much. Members of the legislature, why are you all going to insist on keeping this nonsensical language in here? Nobody can dismiss a school board. Who's going to dismiss the whole State Board of Education? Why would you even put that in there? There are business people here who probably think a little more deep. Well, no, I'd leave that alone. Trump is a businessman. But I don't let him be the standard of what every business person is. I think Senator Bowles is bringing a very reasonable proposal. But I don't want you to vote for it. I want you to vote against it. Excuse me. I want you to vote against it. Stand up for those ignoramuses who did the best they knew how. Is it their fault that they were ignorant? Is it their fault they were not lawyers? Is it their fault that they put language in the law that cannot be carried out?
1 minute.
How can they know if they're not taught? How can they be taught without a teacher? How can somebody teach unless he or she is qualified to do so? The Bible says, how can one teach unless he or she is sent? Keep this language. Say that something shall be considered for dismissal, but a person may be dismissed. But in reality, there is nobody to do the dismissing. That is beautiful. It will be a perfect snapshot of what I tell people about the level of intelligence on the floor of the legislature. But this does not go to intelligence. This goes to lack of attention. This bill does not draw attention.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators Wayne, Hilkeman, Moser, and Chambers. Senator Slama, you are recognized.
Yes, I'd just like to make a point of clarification on the earlier set of questioning by Senator Chambers. In paragraph 7 on page 5, every school board, the State Board of Education, and the superintendent of each school district in the state shall be held directly responsible in the order named for carrying out this section, and neglect thereof by any employee or appointed official shall be considered a dereliction of duty and may be considered a cause for dismissal. The key here is that it may only be considered a cause for dismissal of the employee or appointed official. As Senator Chambers and I'm sure the rest of this body knows, school boards and the State Board of Education are elected officials and would not be impacted or at risk of dismissal with this section. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Groney, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Coincidence. There's a news item just broke. They arrested the person who did vandalism to Congressman Fultonberry's signs, political signs, googly eyes, and changed the name of it. College professor, sociology professor at the University of Nebraska. Maybe we need to expand this, that we expect our employees at the University of Nebraska, from the president on down, to make sure the employees at the University of Nebraska reflect the character of the state of Nebraska. That's what this provision in this law does. It gives clearance to the school board to dismiss somebody for a lack of character, of what they expect. We should expand it to math, science, so nobody puts their personal views of what America is, what science is, what math is, in the classroom. That we give them direction of what should be taught, how it should be taught, and then we expect those employees to do it. And if they don't, then they are dismissed. All this provision does is says we have an employee who is ignoring direction, and we're giving the school board and the superintendent and the principal, if necessary, the ability to dismiss that individual. That's common sense. That's common sense in free enterprise. If an individual works for a free enterprise and their actions do not reflect well on the company, they can be dismissed, and it hurts their sales, it hurts their business model, because they get a drunk driving, do some other things. It's the same, it should be the same in government. If you don't follow direction, you don't follow the duties assigned to you, you should be able to be dismissed. And the elected board hires a superintendent gives them authority of hiring and firing. But when that superintendent does not do their job, the school board should dismiss that person. It's common sense. It gives them legal standing. It protects them from lawsuit. It's good. This is good law. It's good statute. The existing statute is good and needs to remain in the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Groney. Senator Chambers, you are recognized, and this is your third time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, I'd like to have a little conversation with Senator Slama if she will respond.
Senator Slama, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Slama, when I call myself teaching, I give hints along the way to let people know what the answer ought to be. Did you hear me say that the only one in this list who could be fired would be the superintendent because he or she is hired by the school board? Did you hear me say that?
Yes.
Okay, now that is the only employee.
Yes.
Then I ask other questions that really are not relevant, but because I ask the question, people get caught up in that, and that's how they get put on a false trail. A teacher is not supposed to give the answers directly. Give hints. Senator Groney comes back now because somebody probably told him what the answer is. He should have been up here. But Senator Slama, I would like now that we've come to this point to discuss it further. But who is the genius who brought it to your attention that the employee or the appointed official can be done away with?
That was something that my fantastic LA brought to my attention.
You want me to tell you why I'm saying that? Sometimes people who do work are not recognized. I don't mean by you, but dealing with the public is extremely difficult, and yet the people who do that are not given the consideration they ought to be given. So when we have staff members who are on their toes, their P's and Q's, and do what it is they should do, it should be acknowledged. And I'm glad Senator Slama will do that, and I had no doubt that she would, and she wouldn't be embarrassed. I wouldn't do that to some people. Now, Senator Slama, that's all that I will ask you now. I would like to ask Senator Groney a question.
Senator Groney, would you yield to a question?
If necessary.
Senator Groney, in this same paragraph that we're discussing, any employee or appointed official shall be considered a dereliction of duty if he or she doesn't carry out this section. Does it say anywhere that the appointed official will be directed by somebody to carry it out?
No, it'd be part of their job description.
You don't know that, but maybe you do. Who is the appointed official by job description that this language speaks of?
It would probably be the principal.
Not probably.
It is the principal, or it could be an assistant principal. It could be, if you're a big enough school district, a PR person, or a health and what do you call it, the employee division.
So a principal is one who is hired and appointed. Is that right?
To certain duties.
Who appoints the principal?
The duties would be outlined by the superintendent. Superintendent would hire an individual to be the principal in the building and give him the duties or her the duties.
Who employs the principal?
The school district, the taxpayers.
So then the principal, the superintendent, merely appoints this person who is, well, I'm kind of lost. Would you take me from the time this individual is not a principal to the time where he or she is a principal and tell me who all is involved in that person reaching that status, if you know?
You're a principal when you get hired as the principal of a building.
Have you ever heard of a teacher being appointed to be a principal?
No.
Do you think there is ever?
Oh, yes, I have. If somebody leaves or death, they will instantly. I had it in a school district I grew up in. An individual had a car wreck, and then they appointed a teacher to take his position.
That's all I'll ask you now, because in a minute I can't ask my questions. You couldn't have the time to give the answer, so I will continue this discussion, and I have at least another hour that I can pursue my instructing this morning. Unless, well, anyway, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama, Groney, and Chambers. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Bowles, you recognize the close on IM 365.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the dialogue and the discussion. Fundamentally, I think this comes down to fairness to an employed superintendent who is managing a situation in which there might be differences of opinion and fair perspectives on good judgment about what is or isn't dereliction of duty, what is or isn't fully complying with the statute. I think the language is confusing as it relates to the school board members. And I think that we need to respect that the school board members, just like state senators, are democratically elected, and that the voters have the final say about whether or not they are performing their duties as assigned. I think that different school board members may have different opinions about what it means to fully implement this statute. And at the end of the day, the statute remains in place with or without Section 7. With or without Section 7, we are still establishing in state law the responsibilities of the American Civics Committee. So I think fundamentally this is a matter of local control, and if we support the principles of local control, we need to support them in this context as well. So I would ask for a roll call and a record vote, because I do think that this is a matter of local control, and I'd like to see where the body lies. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bowles. The question before the body is the adoption of AM 365. A roll call vote has been requested. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Albright. Voting no. Senator Arch. Voting no. Senator Blood.
I'm sorry, there's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
26 ayes, 2 nays, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Brewer, please check in. Senator Linehan, please check in. Senator Linehan, please check in. All members are accounted for. The question before the body is the adoption of AM 365. A roll call vote has been requested in regular order. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Albright. Voting no. Senator Arch. Voting no. Senator Blood. Voting yes. Senator Bowles. Voting yes. Senator Bostelman. Voting no. Senator Brandt. Voting no. Senator Brewer. Voting no. Senator Breezy. Senator Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Chambers. Voting yes, Senator Clements. Voting no, Senator Crawford. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting no, Senator Erdman. Voting no, Senator Friesen. Voting no, Senator Geist. Voting no, Senator Gregert. Voting no, Senator Groney. Voting no, Senator Halloran. Voting no, Senator Ben Hansen. Voting no, Senator Matt Hansen. Yes. Voting yes, Senator Hilgers. No. Voting no, Senator Hilkeman. Yes. Voting yes, Senator Howard. Yes. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. No. Voting no, Senator Hunt. Yes. Voting yes, Senator Kolowski. Voting yes, Senator Colderman. Voting no, Senator LeGrone. Voting no, Senator Lathrop. Voting yes, Senator Lindstrom. Voting no, Senator Linehan. Voting no, Senator Lowe. Voting no, Senator McAllister. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Senator Morfeld. Voting yes, Senator Moser. Voting no, Senator Merman. Voting no, Senator Pansing Brooks. Voting yes, Senator Quick. Voting yes, Senator Scheer. Voting no, Senator Slama. Voting no, Senator Stinner. Voting no, Senator Vargas. Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Voting yes, Senator Williams. Voting no, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Vote is 19 ayes, 27 nays, Mr. President.
The amendment is not adopted. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, the next amendment I have is from Senator Chambers, Floor Amendment 12.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Chambers, you recognize the open on Floor Amendment 12.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, first of all, I can count. That statement is pregnant with meaning. Ignorance will not necessarily prevail. The ignorant usually outnumber those who are not ignorant. Notice I didn't say the intelligent, because somebody can be highly intelligent and yet ignorant about a certain thing. I don't know how much an atom of iron weighs. I see Senator Slama looking with a cat that swallowed the canary smile, so I'm going to ask her a question.
Senator Slama, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Slama, which weighs more, a pound of feathers or a pound of gold?
That would be, so we've got a different measuring system for feathers versus gold. There's 16 ounces in a pound of feathers, because that's how we measure feathers. There's 12 ounces in, I'm trying to think of the
Troy.
measure. Yes, in Troy. The grams are slightly different in an ounce, but I still believe
You've
it's a
answered
pound
it.
of feathers that.
Avoirdupois, which is 16 ounces,
Yeah.
precious metals, Troy, 12 ounces.
But the ounces in Troy have a different number of grams than the ounces in the standard system.
But the
used to
feathers
measure
would weigh
feathers,
more
yes.
when
The
you
feathers
ultimately
do weigh
get to
more.
it. Yes. Members of the legislature, unknown to you all, Senator Slama and I, that's all I'll ask you. We've had some conversations. And I'm not going to tell you the content of those conversations, but I will never hesitate to pose a question to her, so she may as well be ready. But let me tell you what this amendment would do. Because I dislike everything in this particular bill that's before us, I like all of those sections of statute of which this bill is a part. Therefore, this amendment would say, strike all of the original sections from this bill and insert the following. More or less, I'm paraphrasing. There shall outright repeal, these following statutes will be outright repealed. That means you don't have to set them forth in their entirety, just give the number of the statute. Section 724, Section 725, Section 726, Section 727, and for the sake of the record, because I wouldn't expect you, anybody on this floor, to know what each one of these sections deals with. And this is not one of those I gotcha trick type amendments. Section 79-724 has this as a heading, which, by the way, is not an official part of the statute. It just informs you. American citizenship, semicolon, Committee on Americanism, semicolon, created. Duties, semicolon, required instruction, semicolon, patriotic exercises, semicolon, duties of officers. None of that should be a matter of statute, because the underlying premise is false, that things which should be better left to those who do the educating should not be matters of statute, because that, in effect, freezes what is said in the same way that little insects have been encased in amber. They've been there forever, relatively speaking. 79-725, and I'm surprised that Senator Roney is in favor of this being in the statute when he talks about what the schools ought to be teaching and what they ought not. What is this? Character education. Senator Roney has always been against that kind of thing in the schools. It's not the school's job to teach character, but he didn't read the statute, so he doesn't know it's there. But now that he knows it's there, he's going to say, well, that's all right, leave it there. But 79-725, character education, principles of instruction, duty of teachers. 79-726, character education, outline of instruction, duty of commissioner of education. These things should not be in the statute. I'm trying to remove them. 79-727, Americanism and character education, violation, penalty. I think that probably would be stricken by the bill itself, but I'm getting all of that out and will strike this entire complex of statutes. That would be what I am offering with my amendment. Do I think you'll accept it? No. Then why do I offer it? Because I want to take some time. I'm going to take all the time that I need. And you know what's going to happen? Either the speaker's going to take this off the agenda, or a motion for cloture is going to be made. It's going to fail, and the thing is dead for the session. There is more than one way to crack a walnut. You thought I'd say skin a cat, didn't you? Well, I don't believe in killing animals for the sheer love of it, for trophy taking, or the other barbaric human reasons for killing animals who are unoffending, and will offend, as it's called, against a human only when the human intrudes on that animal's territory. The animals don't come hunting people, not even those called man-eaters. The animals they found that eat human beings, that eat them, are those who are very ill, those who are injured, those who are weak, those who cannot catch and master their ordinary prey. See, lions, cheetahs, they eat fast food. What is fast food in the animal kingdom? Antelope, deer, those that move rapidly. They got fast food everywhere. If one of those animals called a man-eater is eating men or human beings, it's because they cannot bring down their prey that they ordinarily would go after. What I said I'm going to do this morning is some instructing. I asked about civics. I would like to ask Senator, I don't see Senator McAllister, but I was going to ask him some questions. He said he now favors this bill because he found out how little people know about, I don't know if he said the government or about certain things. I wish Senator Moorfield was here, but he's not here. He's our resident expert on the Constitution. Who is a smart aleck in here? I'd like to ask Senator Erdman a question if he'd respond.
Senator Erdman, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Erdman, if you don't have the answer to this question, you would join most people. Do you happen to know how many original articles there are in the U.S. Constitution?
I don't. 7?
Yes. Senator Erdman, there is a number of amendments. I said there is a number. Some people will say, well, a number would be plural. But my verb deals with number. There is a number. Do you happen to know how many amendments there are to the Constitution?
Would you like me to guess?
Let me see. I better be sure myself, shouldn't I?
$27?
1 minute.
Bingo. Thank you, Senator Erdman.
Thank you.
I'm glad that I picked the right person to ask that question to. Members of the legislature, there are only 7 articles in the U.S. Constitution, but there are 27 amendments. The Constitution is what they call the organic or basic law on which, in this case, a government is built or established, and it uses general language which is susceptible to being expanded, interpreted, amended. But you set out those basic principles, then you offer amendments as deemed necessary. And those old codgers, most of them slaveholders, anticipated that this Constitution was not perfect. So in Article...
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama, Erdman, and Chambers. Speaker Scheer.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've reached the allotted time for 399 on its first discussion level, so we will move on to LB 660, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to the Speaker's announcement, we will move on to the next item on our agenda. Mr. Clerk, for items.